My son-in-law's fist crashed into my jaw. The impact was a dry, shocking explosion of force, sending a constellation of white-hot stars across my vision and buckling my knees. I staggered backward, the coppery taste of blood instantly filling my mouth. But before I could fall, my own daughter, my Monique, grabbed a fistful of my gray hair at the temple. Her grip was brutally tight, and she dragged me, stumbling and disoriented, through the gleaming foyer of her expensive home. They threw me out onto the porch like a sack of unwanted trash and slammed the door. The sound of the deadbolt clicking into place was a punctuation mark on their betrayal. I tumbled down the 2 short steps and landed on the cold, unforgiving sidewalk of a pristine Atlanta suburb. I am Hattie Mae Johnson. I am 72 years old. For 40 years, I was a schoolteacher. I taught children how to read, how to be kind, how to look for the truth beneath the surface. And now, I was sitting on the ground, humiliated and bleeding, cast out by my own child. All for a single quiet word: no. Dear friends, we're so happy you're here with us today. Every time you join, it gives us the chance to share stories that might inspire you, guide you, or even change the way you see things. Your comments and support mean the world to us, and we're truly grateful. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? We might just find a story that feels close to yours, and who knows, it could be exactly what you need. So stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. As I sat there, a profound, chilling question echoed in the sudden silence. When did my sweet girl, the one who loved sunflowers and chasing fireflies, turn into this monster with the cold, dead eyes? But there were no tears. There was no self-pity. There was only the cold, hard clarity of a plan about to come to fruition. They saw a broken old woman, a victim to be discarded. They had no idea they were looking into the eyes of a strategist. They didn't know that I had been preparing for this very day, for this very betrayal, for months. And they certainly didn't know that, in approximately 2 hours, their entire glittering, fraudulent world was scheduled to begin its irreversible collapse. How does a mother's love curdle into this kind of poison? That was the question that haunted me as I pushed myself into a sitting position on the cold concrete. But I knew there was no time for grief for the daughter I had lost. There was only time for the plan. It had all started 6 months earlier with a hug that felt like a cage and words as sweet as Georgia peach cobbler. It started with a trap, built from the bricks of my own unconditional love for my daughter. After my husband James passed away, I lived alone in our cozy little house in a historic part of town. I was perfectly content. My health was good, my pension was steady, and the life savings James and I had meticulously accumulated gave me a profound sense of security. But Monique began calling every day, her voice a syrupy blend of carefully crafted concern and loneliness. "Mama, I miss you so much," she'd plead. "I miss our evening talks over tea. This big house is so empty without you. Please, sell your place and come live with us. There's so much room." Derrick would be so thrilled. You know how much he adores you. Derrick, her polished real estate developer husband, would always be on the line, cooing his agreement. "That's right, Hattie. You'd be a blessing, not a burden. Family has to take care of family." His business model was to buy up historic homes just like mine, tear them down, and erect soulless, boxy condominiums in their place. He was a vulture who saw history as an undervalued asset. I saw the predatory gleam in his eyes whenever he looked at me, at my paid-off home, at my comfortable life. But I looked at my daughter, at her pleading face, and my mother's heart chose to believe the beautiful lie. Are you ready to learn how far some people will go for money? Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who call you family, the ones who know exactly which heartstrings to pull. I sold my home. I sold the place where every corner held a memory of James, where I had raised Monique, where 45 years of a good, honest life were etched into the very floorboards. I packed my memories into boxes and moved into their enormous, cold, modern house, a house that felt more like a showroom than a home. At first, it was a perfect illusion. Monique did spend the evenings with me. Derrick did bring me flowers and call me his second mom. They wrapped me in a suffocating blanket of attention, and I almost allowed myself to forget my initial suspicions. I felt happy, thinking I had found my family again. But a good teacher knows her students. And I knew deep down that this performance was too perfect, too rehearsed. I knew it was only a matter of time before they showed me what they really wanted. I was waiting. I was watching. Because before I had ever agreed to sell my home, before I had ever packed a single box, I had made a quiet visit to my lawyer. And we had prepared for exactly this kind of war. To understand the end of that story, you must first understand its true beginning. And it did not begin with a fist. It began a week before my daughter's sweet, poisonous invitation in the quiet, wood-paneled office of my lawyer, Mr. Franklin Hayes. Franklin had been my late husband James's closest friend since they were boys, and my lawyer for 40 years. He was a man of quiet integrity, with eyes that could spot a lie from 100 paces. I sat opposite his large oak desk, the same desk where James and I had signed the mortgage for our first home. "He's a wolf, Franklin," I said, my voice low and certain. "My son-in-law, Derrick." He looks at me, but he doesn't see a mother. He sees a walking bank account. Love can be a blinding light, but it can also be the perfect camouflage for a predator. I knew I had to walk into the lion's den to stay close to my daughter. I just had to make sure I wasn't the one on the menu. I explained the situation. Monique's daily calls, her sudden, desperate need for me to live with them, Derrick's saccharine endorsements, the unsubtle hints about the value of my paid-off house and my comfortable retirement fund. Franklin listened patiently, his fingertips steepled under his chin. When I was finished, he shook his head. "Don't do it, Hattie," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble of concern. "This has red flags all over it. Keep your house, keep your money. Love your daughter from a safe distance." "And if I do that," I countered, "he will use my refusal to isolate her from me completely. He'll tell her I'm a selfish old woman who doesn't trust her. In a year, she might not even take my calls. Number. I can't be another thing he takes from her. I have to go. I have to see if there is anything left of the girl I raised." Franklin sighed, recognizing the steel in my voice. "Then if you insist on walking into the storm, we had better build you a storm shelter first. Have you ever built a fortress made of paper? A castle whose walls are legal clauses and whose moat is the full, unyielding weight of contract law? That is what we built that day. A quiet, invisible fortress to protect a lifetime of honest work." Franklin explained the plan. It was an elegant piece of legal engineering called an irrevocable asset protection trust. He drew a diagram on his legal pad, his pen moving with practiced precision. "We will create a new legal entity, the Eleanor Trust, named for your mother," he explained. "You will be the sole trustee and beneficiary. We will then transfer every liquid asset you have, your savings, your investment portfolio, and once it is sold, the entire proceeds from your house, into this trust." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means," he said, a grim smile touching his lips, "that the money is no longer legally yours to give away, even if you wanted to. It belongs to the trust. You can draw from it for your living expenses, you can direct its investments, but you cannot make large withdrawals or add anyone else to it without a formal process that I, as the trust's legal counsel, would have to oversee. It makes your fortune legally untouchable to any outside party. It is a vault, and only you have the key." My lawyer saw the physical risk of my plan, the emotional toll it would take, but I saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about protecting my money anymore. It was a test. A final, painful test to see if the daughter I had raised was still in there, or if the monster had consumed her completely. We added one more layer. Franklin gave me a small, unregistered, prepaid cell phone. "Keep this with you at all times, fully charged," he instructed. "If the day comes that you fear, the day they make their final move, you call me on this phone. You say one word and one word only. Sunflower. That will be the trigger." "The trigger for what?" "The moment I hear that word," he said, his eyes now hard as granite, "I have your pre-signed instructions. I will notify the fraud departments of every bank where you hold an account. I will place a legal freeze on all activities related to the trust. I will inform the city about the fraudulent mortgage documents they will have likely made you sign. I will, in short, unleash a legal firestorm that will burn their world to the ground. Sunflower is the signal to light the match." I walked out of his office that day, feeling a profound sense of calm. The legal fortress was built. The protocol was in place. My assets were secure. The only thing left to put at risk was myself. I drove to a quiet park, sat on a bench, and took out my regular cell phone. I dialed my daughter's number. When she answered, I filled my voice with a manufactured, joyful excitement. "Monique, honey, it's Mama," I said. "I've got wonderful news. I've been thinking about your offer, and you're right. It's time for this old woman to be with her family. I'm going to sell the house. I'm moving in." The squeal of delight on the other end of the line was the sound of a predator watching its prey walk willingly into the snare. Leaving my home of 45 years was like tearing a piece of my own soul. Every scuff mark on the floorboards, every faded patch of floral wallpaper, was a paragraph in the story of my life with James. As the movers, hired by Derrick, efficiently and impersonally loaded my memories into a truck, I felt a profound sense of loss. Monique was there, fluttering around, offering useless suggestions. Derrick was on his phone the entire time, barking orders at a subordinate, clearly annoyed by the interruption to his important day. I was trading a library of love for a sterile, empty showroom. Their house was exactly as I remembered. Enormous, echoing, and cold. My new room was a guest suite, beautifully decorated but utterly devoid of personality. It felt like a luxury hotel room, a place for a temporary visitor, not a family member. Still, I unpacked my life, placing the photo of James on my nightstand, a silent, steadying presence in this strange new land. For the first few weeks, they played their parts to perfection. Derrick would bring me a coffee in the morning, asking with his false, charming smile how I had slept. Monique would insist on our evening tea time, where she would gossip about our friends and ask for my advice, making me feel needed, wanted. It was a masterful performance. Have you ever wanted to be wrong about someone so badly that you start to lie to yourself? I watched them play the part of the loving family, and a foolish, hopeful part of me began to pray. I prayed that my secret plan, my protected trust, my prepaid phone with its single terrible number, that it would all be for nothing. It is a strange and painful thing to hope that your own meticulous preparations were a complete and utter waste of time. But the perfect performance couldn't last forever. The first dropped line, the first crack in the facade, came in the third week. It was a casual question from Monique as she helped me pay a bill on my laptop. "Mama, you should really let me organize all your online accounts for you," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured helpfulness. "It's so confusing for you, I'm sure. I could link everything, create a spreadsheet. I just need your usernames and passwords to get it all set up." I smiled, a gentle grandmotherly smile. "That is so sweet of you, dear," I said, "but my Franklin handles all of that. He has a system. I wouldn't want to mess up his system." Her own smile tightened for just a fraction of a second, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes before it was gone. It was a tiny thing, a little stone skipping across the placid water of their performance, but I knew what it was. It was the first tremor before the earthquake. Derrick's approach came a few days later. It was more direct. He left a glossy brochure on the coffee table during our evening tea. It was for a high-risk, high-yield real estate investment fund, one of his own, of course. "Just something I'm putting together for my top-tier clients, Hattie," he said, leaning back as if letting me in on a big secret. "The returns are going to be astronomical. It's a shame to think of your money just sitting in some low-interest savings account. We could be doubling it for you, for the family." There it was, the first direct probe. The first move to claim the prize they believed was now within their grasp. He was no longer just the loving son-in-law, he was the financial advisor, offering me a can't-miss opportunity that would, of course, require him to take control of my assets. I picked up the brochure and pretended to study it, my face a mask of polite, slightly confused interest. "Oh my," I said, "that does look very impressive, Derrick. But you know me. James always handled the investments. I wouldn't know the first thing about all this." I handed it back to him. "It's too complicated for an old school teacher," I said with a soft, self-deprecating laugh. He took it from me, his disappointment barely concealed behind his charming smile. He thought he was playing a game of chess with a novice. He couldn't see the invisible fortress I had built around my queen. The exposition was now complete. The players had revealed their intentions. The conflict was about to begin in earnest. The honeymoon was officially over. The masks of love and concern, having failed to produce the desired result, were put away. Now, when I entered a room, the conversation would stop for a beat too long. The smiles my daughter and son-in-law offered were thin, brittle things, stretched tight over their growing impatience. Every meal became a business meeting where I was the asset to be liquidated. Every evening tea with Monique was no longer a walk down memory lane, but a carefully orchestrated guilt trip. "Mama, I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn," she'd say, her voice laced with a wounded tone she had perfected. "Don't you trust us? After we opened our home to you, everything Derrick does, he does for our family, for our future. It hurts that you don't see that." Derrick, in turn, tried a different tactic, condescension. He would corner me in the living room and draw diagrams on a napkin explaining market volatility and leveraged assets, as if he were speaking to a slow-witted child. "You see, Hattie," he'd say, his voice oozing with false patience, "money that isn't working is dying. Your savings are dying. I'm offering you a lifeline, a chance to be a part of something real, something that will secure this family for generations." I would listen, my face a mask of polite confusion, nodding and asking simple questions that I already knew the answers to. "But isn't real estate a big risk, Derrick? What happens if the market turns?" My questions, born of a teacher's lifetime of critical thinking, only irritated him. To him, my caution was not wisdom. It was the ignorance of an old woman who simply didn't understand. The first major offensive in their campaign came about a month after I moved in. They targeted my passwords. Have you ever let someone lie to you just to see how deep they're willing to dig their own grave? I watched my daughter approach me, her face a picture of manufactured panic, and I handed her the shovel. "Mama, I was just reading an article online," she said, holding her phone out to me. "It's about these new scams targeting seniors. They're hacking into bank accounts. We need to check your online security right away." She sat beside me at my laptop, guiding me through the process of logging into my primary bank account, the one I had intentionally kept active with a modest sum for just this purpose. As I typed in my password, I could see her eyes in the reflection of the screen tracking the movement of my fingers. She was as subtle as a hungry cat watching a canary. I pretended not to notice. "Oh dear," I said. "You're right. This is so complicated." I let her help me set up new security questions, her fingers brushing against the keyboard, her mind memorizing every detail. They thought they had just stolen the key to the vault. They had no idea I had already moved the treasure to an entirely different continent. The final piece of their trap was sprung 2 weeks later. It was a Friday afternoon. Derrick came home early, a large, intimidating stack of documents in his hands. "Good news, Hattie," he announced, spreading the papers across the dining room table. "The bank has approved our refinancing application for the house. It's going to lower our monthly payment significantly. It's just a lot of routine paperwork we all need to sign." He spoke with a breathless, manufactured urgency. "Our lawyer needs these couriered back by 5 o'clock. We just need your signature on a few pages. As a resident of the house, it's just a formality." The document they slid in front of me, tucked between pages of innocuous insurance forms and mailing address updates, would have made me legally responsible for their $500,000 mortgage. It was a chain they were trying to lock around my neck. I smiled, picked up the heavy, expensive pen they offered me, and signed my name with a steady hand. They thought they were chaining me to them. They had no idea I was forging the final piece of evidence for their own prison cell. "Oh, thank you, Mama," Monique gushed, quickly gathering the pages before I could have a second look. "You're a lifesaver. This helps the family so much." They left for a celebratory dinner, their faces alight with victory. They believed they now had it all: access to my bank accounts and my name as a financial guarantor on their largest asset. They had successfully ensnared the foolish old woman. The moment their car disappeared down the street, I walked into my room. From the bottom of my knitting basket, I retrieved the secret, prepaid phone. When they had spread the documents out, in their haste, they had left a single extra copy of the mortgage agreement on the table. I had quietly slipped it into a magazine while they were distracted. I placed the document on my bed, the fraudulent signature staring up at me. I turned on the burner phone and calmly took a clear, well-lit photograph of the entire page. Then I sent it, via a secure messaging app, to one person, my lawyer, Mr. Franklin. The caption I sent with it was simple: "The noose tightens." A few minutes after I sent the encrypted photo to my lawyer, my burner phone vibrated once. A new message. It was from Mr. Franklin. It was brief and to the point. "Evidence received and logged, Hattie. The file grows. Stay safe. Remember the protocol?" I deleted the message and powered down the phone, hiding it once more at the bottom of my knitting basket. I had just handed my lawyer the evidence of a state-level felony. Now my role shifted again. I was no longer a strategist laying a trap. I was a quiet spy, living behind enemy lines, documenting every new crime as they unknowingly committed it against me. The change in the household was immediate and profound. Having secured, as they thought, the keys to my kingdom, Monique and Derrick no longer felt the need to perform for me. The curtain fell on their play of a loving, caring family. The evening tea sessions stopped abruptly. Monique was suddenly too busy with her various social engagements. Derrick stopped bringing me coffee in the morning and began treating me with a dismissive indifference, as if I were a piece of furniture he had grown tired of. I was no longer a mother to be cherished. I was an asset that had been successfully acquired. Then the withdrawals started. Have you ever watched someone steal from you with a smile on their face? The first was a small testing amount, $500 from my checking account, the one they had the password to. The bank alert popped up on my laptop. A few days later, a charge for nearly $3,000 at a luxury boutique. I saw the new designer handbag Monique was carrying the next day. Then came a charge for a $5,000 watch, which soon appeared on Derrick's wrist. They bought lavish gifts with my life savings, calling it an investment in the family's happiness, and I just smiled, made a precise note in a small hidden journal, and let them dig their graves a little deeper with every purchase. I became a ghost in their house, a quiet observer they barely noticed, and in my solitude, I sharpened my mind. I spent my days at the local library using their computers to research Derrick's company, his partners, and the Phoenix Project, the deal of a lifetime he was so desperate to fund. I learned about zoning laws, investment capital, and the specific city tax breaks he was applying for. I was a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher, but I was giving myself a master's class in corporate finance. I was no longer just the victim. I was becoming the expert witness in my own case. They thought my silence was acceptance. They thought my compliance was weakness. They had no idea that every quiet moment I spent alone in their house was a moment I was using to sharpen the blade of justice that was about to fall on their necks. The final escalation, the move I had been waiting for, came about a month later. It was a Saturday night. They had guests over, other wealthy, arrogant couples like themselves. I had been relegated to my room, asked to stay out of sight, but the door was ajar, and I could hear Derrick holding court in the living room, his voice booming with a confidence supercharged by expensive whiskey and his recent financial successes. He was talking about his project. "It's the biggest redevelopment deal this city has seen in a decade," he boasted, his words slurred slightly. "We're in the final stage, the last piece of the puzzle. Just need to close out the final capital injection to satisfy the primary investors." One of his friends asked him if the financing was secure. I heard the clink of ice in a glass as Derrick laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated hubris. "As good as gold," he said. "My mother-in-law, bless her sentimental old heart, is our final private investor, her entire life savings. The last transfer of $500,000 is scheduled for Monday morning. My bank manager is already prepared. By Monday at noon, the Phoenix Project will be fully capitalized, and we, my friends, will be on our way to making history." I stood in the shadows of my doorway, listening. There it was, the timeline, the final move, Monday morning. He had just announced the exact date and time of his own execution to a room full of witnesses. I quietly closed my bedroom door. The time for spying was over. The time for waiting was over. I walked to my knitting basket and retrieved the burner phone. It was time to prepare for the final act. It was time to think about the word sunflower. The last 48 hours in that house were the most difficult performance of my life. I had the final crucial piece of intelligence, Monday morning. I had the timeline for their ultimate act of betrayal. Now, all I had to do was survive the weekend, to continue playing the part of the meek, oblivious old woman, while a storm of anxiety and grim anticipation raged inside me. I had to sit and listen to them plan a future built on the rubble of my own, and I had to smile all the while knowing that on Monday, the architect of that future would be facing a wrecking ball. They were giddy with triumph. Their victory was so close they could taste it. Their behavior toward me shifted again, becoming a parody of loving care. It was the condescending kindness of a zookeeper to an animal that was about to be put down. Monique insisted on giving me a manicure on Saturday afternoon, her hands holding mine as she painted my nails, all while talking about the new summer home they planned to buy. "It's on a lake, Mama," she said, her eyes shining with a greed she mistook for happiness. "With a big dock. We'll all be so happy there. You'll have your own little suite of rooms. Have you ever had to look at a blueprint for a paradise that you knew was about to be swallowed by the sea?" I looked at my daughter, this stranger who was promising me a room in a house she planned to buy with my stolen money, and I felt a profound, bottomless sadness for the person she had become. I simply smiled and told her that sounded lovely. On Sunday, Derrick was in an expansive, magnanimous mood. He made a grand show of cooking a fancy brunch, presenting the food with a flourish. Nothing but the best for my two favorite ladies, he said, beaming. All I could think about was the photograph of the fraudulent mortgage document on my burner phone, the one that made me legally liable for this very house he was cooking in. That evening was the final act. Derrick opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving, an expensive vintage that cost more than my first month's salary as a teacher. He poured a glass for himself and Monique. He raised his glass, his eyes finding mine across the dinner table. "A toast," he said, his voice full of smug, unearned authority. "To the future. And to family, whose support makes it all possible." His eyes were boring into me, and I knew this was his final silent demand. This was my last chance to object, to fight, to show my hand. I looked at my daughter, who was beaming at her husband with pure adoration, a willing accomplice to her own mother's destruction. I looked at him, the wolf in expensive clothing, so confident in his kill. I slowly raised my simple glass of water. I met his gaze without flinching. "To the future," I agreed, my voice perfectly even. He had no idea what kind of future I was toasting to. They went to bed early that night, drunk on champagne and the intoxicating promise of a future that would never come. I waited in my room, listening until the house was completely silent, until the only sound was the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock that had belonged to my own father. Then I began my final preparations. I took my small, pre-packed duffel bag from the back of the closet. It contained a change of clothes, my essential documents, and the small hidden journal in which I had documented their every crime. I took out the burner phone and plugged into the wall, ensuring it had a full charge for the morning. I was a soldier, cleaning my rifle before the dawn raid. I sat in the dark by my window, looking out at the quiet, sleeping street. The time for observation, for patience, for enduring their poisonous charade was over. The time for action had finally, mercifully, arrived. At 5 o'clock in the morning, long before the sun had begun to touch the Atlanta sky, my own silent alarm went off in my head. I got up. I dressed in the quiet darkness. I took one last look at the room that had been my cage for 6 agonizing months. Then I picked up the fully charged burner phone. My thumb hovered over the single contact stored in its memory. Mr. Franklin. The rising action was complete. The climax was about to begin. All it would take was a single word. At 5:05 a.m. on a dark Monday morning in Atlanta, I stood by my bedroom window and pressed the call button on the burner phone. The house around me was tomb silent, the only sound the steady, rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the final seconds of my old life. The phone rang only once before it was answered. "Franklin Hayes?" His voice was awake, alert, and ready. I took a breath. "Franklin," I said, my voice a low, steady whisper. "It's Hattie." There was a pause, the intake of a breath on the other end. "I'm listening, Hattie." "Sunflower," I said. It was a single word, spoken into the pre-dawn silence of a sleeping house. Sunflower. It was the name of my daughter's favorite flower when she was a little girl, the ones we used to grow in the backyard of my real home. Now it was the code word for her ruin, a quiet floral word delivered to trigger a legal avalanche. "Understood, Hattie." Franklin's voice was grim and professional. "The protocol is now active. Are you safe?" "For the moment," I answered. "He's making the final transfer this morning. He said he'd be at the bank when it opens." "He will fail," Franklin stated with absolute certainty. "Now listen to me. You need to leave that house immediately. Do not wait for them to wake up. Get your bag and go. Find a safe, anonymous public place, a 24-hour coffee shop, a library as soon as it opens. Somewhere with people. I will be in touch within the hour with the next steps. Go now." The line went dead. I slipped the phone into my coat pocket. I took my single duffel bag from its hiding place. I walked out of my room, my soft-soled slippers making no sound on the polished hardwood floors. I did not look back. I passed the dining room, where they had toasted to a future they had stolen. I passed the living room, where they had lied to me with loving words. I walked to the front door and gently, silently, placed the house key on the small table in the foyer. Have you ever walked away from your life with nothing but a single bag and a secret plan? The air of freedom is terrifyingly cold before the sun comes up. As I slipped out the door and pulled it quietly shut behind me, I wasn't just walking away from a house, I was walking away from the ghost of the daughter I once loved and the woman I had been forced to become. While I was walking through the dark, quiet streets toward a small 24-hour diner 2 miles away, my lawyer, Mr. Franklin, was a general commencing a full-scale assault from his home office. The Sunflower Protocol was not a single action, it was a coordinated, multi-front attack. At precisely 5:15 a.m., a series of pre-written, encrypted emails were sent from his computer. The first was to the regional fraud department manager of my primary bank, a man Franklin knew personally. It cited the legal authority of the Eleanor Trust and flagged all accounts associated with my name for immediate lockdown due to suspected elder financial abuse and criminal fraud, with the fraudulent mortgage document attached as preliminary evidence. The second email went to the city's commercial registrar and the county clerk's office, officially filing a legal challenge and fraud alert against the mortgage filing, effectively poisoning the title on the very house Derrick and Monique were sleeping in. The final set of emails was the most elegant and damaging. Using an anonymous encrypted service, he sent a simple, untraceable message to the board members of the 3 primary investment firms backing Derrick's Phoenix project, investors whose names I had meticulously researched at the library. The message was simple. It would be in your fiduciary interest to perform an immediate and thorough due diligence on the source of the final private capital injection for the Phoenix project, specifically the funds being transferred today from the Hattie Mae Johnson account. You may find they are not as secure as you have been led to believe. The trap wasn't just a lock on my account, it was a web, and it was closing in on Derrick from all sides before he had even had his morning coffee. I arrived at the diner, a small, brightly lit oasis in the pre-dawn darkness. I slid into a booth in the back corner, ordered a black coffee, and opened a book I had brought, but I couldn't read. I just watched the sky outside the window slowly lighten from black to a soft, bruised purple. I was a 72-year-old woman without a home, with one bag to my name. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt a profound, electrifying calm. At 6:30 a.m., my burner phone vibrated, a text from Franklin. The accounts are frozen. The web is spun. He'll be walking into the trap any time now. While I was nursing my second cup of coffee in the quiet anonymity of the diner, the scene in my daughter's home was one of triumphant, oblivious arrogance. Derrick and Monique woke up late, just before 9. I can picture him standing in his silk robe, looking out the large bedroom window at the manicured lawn. He was a conqueror on his coronation day, a king surveying the domain he was about to expand with my life savings. He had no idea he was actually a condemned man, unknowingly taking his last meal. He would have put on one of his most expensive suits, the one he called his deal-closing suit. It was a suit of armor for a man whose only battles were fought in boardrooms. He would have given Monique a smug, self-satisfied kiss. "Start looking at brochures for Tahiti, baby," he would have told her. "By this afternoon, we'll be able to buy the whole damn island." He left the house at 10 o'clock, his briefcase full of documents he thought were his keys to the future. He was heading to the bank, not just to make a transfer, but to perform. He had a meeting with the bank manager, a man named Tom who he played golf with. He expected a morning of backslapping, obsequious smiles and the smooth, satisfying click of money moving into his control. Have you ever seen a man walk into a room so full of his own importance that he is completely blind to the reality of the situation? He strode into that bank expecting bows and handshakes. He was about to be served a cold, hard plate of consequences with no garnish. He was shown directly into the manager's glass-walled office. "Tom, my friend," he boomed, extending a hand. "Ready to move some mountains with me today?" The bank manager, a man who had laughed heartily at Derrick's bad jokes the week before, was not smiling. He did not extend his hand. He gestured grimly to the chair opposite his desk. "Sit down, Derrick," he said, his voice flat and formal. The shift in tone was the first sign that the ground beneath Derrick's feet was not as solid as he believed. His smile faltered. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," the manager said, avoiding his eyes. He slid a single printed sheet of paper across the polished desk. "I received a directive from our corporate legal and fraud division at 6 o'clock this morning. I'm afraid I cannot authorize the transfer you requested." It wasn't a transfer slip. It wasn't a confirmation. It was a notice. And on it were 3 words that would detonate my son-in-law's world. "Account under investigation." Derrick stared at the paper, his face a mask of confusion. "What is this?" "A mistake? Some kind of joke?" he stammered. "My mother-in-law, Hattie Mae Johnson, she's a co-signer on my primary business mortgage. She approved this capital transfer. Her funds are the collateral." "I'm sorry, Derrick," the manager said, his voice now a stiff corporate monotone. "A legal hold has been placed on all accounts bearing Mrs. Johnson's name, effective at 5:15 a.m. this morning. The order comes directly from her legal counsel, citing the authority of a pre-existing asset protection trust and flagging all recent activity for suspected criminal fraud." The color drained from Derrick's face. Trust? Legal counsel? Fraud? The words didn't compute. "That's impossible!" he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "She doesn't have a lawyer other than the old fool who handled her house sale. She's a confused old woman. She doesn't know what she's doing." "According to this," the manager said, tapping the paper, "her counsel, mister. Franklin Hayes knows exactly what he's doing. I'm sorry, Derrick, my hands are tied. I can't give you access to the funds. I can't give you any more information." Derrick stumbled out of the bank and into the bright morning sunlight, his mind reeling. He was in his car, fumbling with his phone. He called my regular cell phone, the one he knew I kept. It rang and rang unanswered on the nightstand in the guest room I would never sleep in again. He then called the house, his voice a frantic bark when Monique answered. "Where is she? Where is your mother? What?" "I don't know, Derrick. I thought she was in her room," Monique said, confused. "Her door is closed." "Well, go and check, you idiot," he screamed. A moment later, Monique came back on the line, her voice now high with panic. "Derrick, she's gone." "Her bed is made. A bag is missing from her closet. The house key is on the table in the foyer. She's gone." The silence on the other end of the line was the sound of a man in free fall. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted. He hung up on his wife, his mind racing. Just then, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was the CEO of his primary investment group, the man who had received Franklin's anonymous tip. Derrick answered, hoping for an ally. The investor's voice was cold as the grave. "Derrick," he said, dispensing with all pleasantries, "my legal team just got off the phone with the city registrar's office. You and I need to have a conversation about a fraudulent mortgage filing. Now." The dominoes were not just falling. They were cascading, and the sound was deafening. The phone call with his primary investor lasted less than 5 minutes. In that short span of time, my son-in-law went from being a multi-millionaire real estate developer on paper to a man facing total financial ruin and a catastrophic barrage of lawsuits. The house of cards, which he had intended to complete with my stolen life savings, had just been hit by a hurricane of consequences. The investor, a ruthless old money tycoon from New York, did not mince words. He informed Derrick that, based on newly discovered information regarding fraudulent financial representations, his firm was exercising the emergency exit clause in their contract. They were pulling all of their $100 million of funding from the Phoenix Project, effective immediately. Furthermore, their legal team was filing a suit against Derrick personally for breach of fiduciary duty and gross negligence. They intended to claw back every penny he had ever been paid in management fees. While Derrick was absorbing this professional death sentence, his mind unable to process the speed of his own collapse, my daughter was pacing the cold marble floors of their silent, empty house. What happens to a doll when the dollhouse starts to burn? My daughter, who had lived her entire married life as a beautiful, smiling accessory to her husband's ambition, was about to find out that the fire doesn't spare the decorations. She tried to call me again, then Derrick. Neither of us answered. The perfect, orderly world she had married into was suddenly, terrifyingly coming apart, and she had no idea why. Then her phone rang. It was Derrick. But the voice on the other end was not the confident, booming baritone of the man she knew. It was the frantic, high-pitched squeal of a cornered animal. "He's ruined!" she heard him screech, his voice cracking with panic. "The old witch has ruined us." It was all a setup, Monique, all of it. "Derrick, what are you talking about?" "Where's my mother?" she asked, her voice trembling. He called her, not as a husband, but as a co-conspirator whose grand crime had just been spectacularly discovered. In his panic, he finally told her the unvarnished truth. "Your mother is gone. She planned this. The bank has frozen everything, every penny. She has some shark of a lawyer. The investors just pulled out. They're suing me. It's all gone, Monique. The Phoenix Project, the money, the house, everything. That foolish old woman, that senile teacher, she tricked us. She was playing us the whole time." Monique sank onto the edge of her perfectly upholstered sofa, the phone slipping from her grasp. The words made no sense. Her mother? The quiet, pliable, grieving old woman she had so easily manipulated? The woman who signed legal documents without reading them? How could she be the architect of this kind of devastation? It was impossible. But the raw, undeniable terror in her husband's voice was real. The foundation of her world, the belief in his invincibility and her mother's weakness, had just been shattered. Back in the quiet, anonymous diner, I was halfway through my first piece of toast when the burner phone vibrated on the table beside me. It was a new text from Mr. Franklin. His updates were as precise and emotionless as a battlefield report. Lead Investment Group has formally withdrawn from Phoenix Project, citing financial malfeasance. Multiple civil suits against Derrick are being filed by his partners this morning. Phase 1 complete. Stay put. I am sending a car for you. I will call at noon with instructions for Phase 2. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The sun was now fully up, casting long shadows across the street. People were hurrying to work, their faces full of the ordinary concerns of an ordinary Monday. They had no idea that empires, both large and small, were falling just a few miles away. My face was a mask of calm, but inside, I felt the profound, somber finality of it all. The development of the action was complete. The enemy was in ruins, his own greed and arrogance having been the instruments of his destruction. The climax was over. All that was left was to inspect the damage and begin the long, quiet work of rebuilding. I looked out the window, my gaze clear, and waited for the car that would take me to the first day of the rest of my life. The car that picked me up from the diner was a quiet, unassuming black sedan, the kind that blends into the city traffic, becoming invisible. The driver, a serious man in a dark suit, simply nodded at me and took my bag. He didn't speak a word, and for that, I was grateful. I was taken to a corporate apartment in a secure, anonymous building downtown. It was clean, comfortable, and had no memories, which was exactly what I needed. The four walls of this apartment were now my fortress. Outside, a storm of my own making was tearing my son-in-law's world apart. I had lit the match, and now my only job was to stay safe from the resulting fire. Mr. Franklin met me there an hour later. He brought with him a container of Ruth's, my sister-in-law's, famous chicken soup and a thick legal binder. "You did well this morning, Hattie," he said, his voice full of a quiet paternal pride. "You were brave." He then laid out the full scope of what the Sunflower Protocol had achieved. "Derrick's financial world is in a state of catastrophic collapse," he explained, his tone all business. "The investors are not just suing, they've filed for an emergency injunction to have a receiver appointed to take over his company, citing gross fraud. The city has opened a formal investigation into the mortgage documents, and my sources tell me that the U.S. Attorney's Office is likely to convene a grand jury based on the evidence we provided them last year." He paused, his expression becoming serious. "Which brings me to my warning. Derrick is a cornered animal now, Hattie. He has lost his money, his company, and his reputation in the space of 3 hours. A man like that, who defines himself by wealth and power, doesn't become humble when he loses it. He becomes a wild animal, lashing out at the person he blames for caging him, and he will be coming for you." As if on cue, the burner phone, which Franklin had placed on the table, began to ring. I looked at the screen. It was Monique. My heart ached. I let it ring for a moment, then took a deep breath and answered, "Mama." Her voice was a high-pitched wail of panic and accusation. "Mama, what did you do?" "What did you do to us? Derrick is going crazy. He says you've ruined everything. The bank, the investors, it's all gone. You have to call them back. You have to tell them it was a mistake. You have to fix this." She was not asking if I was okay. She was not asking why I had left. She was simply parroting her husband's panic, her husband's narrative. In that moment, the last foolish flicker of hope that the daughter I raised was still in there, somewhere, finally died. My lawyer spoke of lawsuits and indictments, but my mind was on my daughter. Was she a victim of her husband's greed or a willing co-conspirator? The law would decide his fate. But in that phone call, my heart delivered its own verdict on hers. "There is nothing to fix, Monique," I said, my voice quiet, sad but firm as bedrock. "I did nothing but protect what your father and I worked our entire lives to build. The choices that brought you to this moment were made by you and by your husband, not by me." But we're family," she sobbed. "You stopped being family the moment your husband raised his fist to me and you dragged me out of your house by my hair?" I replied. The line was cold. It was hard. But it was the truth. "I need to go now, Monique." I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. The sound of my daughter's weeping was a fresh wound, a deep and personal pain that no legal victory could soothe. I looked at Franklin, my eyes full of a sorrow he could not fix. "He will use her to try and find me," I said. "I know," he replied grimly, "which is why we are moving to phase 2. He opened his binder. "We have a court hearing tomorrow morning for an emergency restraining order. Derrick will be legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of you. And we are filing a comprehensive civil suit against both of them to reclaim every penny they stole from you and to attach a lien against this house, which you were fraudulently made to co-sign for." He had a plan for everything, a legal counter for every move. But I knew this wasn't over. A piece of paper from a judge would not stop a man like Derrick, not now. His rage was no longer about money. It had become personal. He would not stop until he faced me, one last time. A courtroom is a theater of consequences. On one side of the aisle sat my daughter and her husband, their lies and greed looking cheap and hollow under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. On my side, there was only Mr. Franklin and the quiet, unshakable weight of the truth. The hearing for the emergency restraining order was brief. Derrick's lawyer, a slick, overconfident man who was clearly out of his depth, tried to argue. He painted a picture of a confused, grieving, and easily influenced old woman, me, who was being manipulated by a predatory new legal team. He claimed this was all a misunderstanding, a family dispute that had gotten out of hand. Then, Mr. Franklin stood up. He did not raise his voice. He simply presented the facts. He submitted my sworn affidavit detailing the events of that Monday morning, including the physical assault. He submitted the photographs of my bruised face taken at the urgent care clinic I had gone to immediately after leaving the diner. He submitted the fraudulent mortgage document, a clear case of felony financial fraud. He submitted a transcript of the call Monique had made to me, in which she admitted their financial ruin and begged me to fix it. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with tired, intelligent eyes, looked at the evidence, then at Derrick, then at me. It took her less than 5 minutes. "The restraining order is granted, effective immediately," she said, her voice a final, impartial gavel. "Mr. Derrick, you are to remain no less than 500 feet from Mrs. Johnson, her residence, and her vehicle at all times. You will have no contact with her, direct or indirect. Do you understand? Have you ever seen a man stripped of his power, layer by layer? First his money, then his reputation, and now his legal right to even approach me. Each loss did not humble him. It only distilled his rage into a purer, more dangerous poison. I saw it in his eyes as they dragged Monique from the courtroom, a dark, simmering promise of retribution that no piece of paper could ever contain. I walked out of the courthouse with a document that said I was safe, but I knew better. A restraining order is just a line drawn on a map. It cannot stop a man who is already lost and has decided to take you with him. I knew he would cross that line. It was only a matter of when. The days that followed were a strange mixture of newfound freedom and creeping dread. Franklin moved me from the anonymous corporate apartment to a small, secure, rented bungalow in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of the city. It was a place with a small garden, and for the first time in months, I felt the simple, honest pleasure of putting my hands in the soil. I began to establish a new, quiet routine. I found a new library. I started taking long walks in the park. I was breathing again. But the threat of Derrick lingered, a shadow at the edge of my new life. He began to unravel. According to Franklin's reports, he was drinking heavily. He had been forced to declare bankruptcy. Monique, now trapped in a marriage with a ruined, volatile man, had apparently tried to leave him, but he had refused, holding the last vestiges of his power over her. She called me once, her voice a terrified whisper, trying to plead his case, trying to find out where I was. Following Franklin's strict instructions, I simply said, "I cannot speak with you, Monique," and hung up. I knew he was hunting for me. I could feel it. The last piece of his broken world he could blame was me, and his rage needed a target. The moment came on a Tuesday evening, 2 weeks after the court hearing. I had just finished watering the small patch of sunflowers I had planted in the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. I felt a rare, genuine moment of peace. Then I heard it, a sound that did not belong in my quiet new world. The angry roar of a high-performance engine, followed by the screech of tires as a car slammed to a halt at the curb in front of my little house. My heart seized. I looked through the kitchen window. It was his car, a low-slung black sports car, a snarling beast in this neighborhood of sensible sedans. He got out of the car, slamming the door with a force that echoed down the quiet street. He had found me. I don't know how. If he had followed someone from Franklin's office or bullied the location out of a terrified Monique, it didn't matter. He was here. He was walking up my pathway. His face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He had crossed the line. The final, inevitable confrontation was here at my doorstep. He had come to my safe harbor to start his final war. He pounded on my front door, the wood shuddering in its frame, his voice a raw, broken roar of my name. "Hattie! I know you're in there. Open this door, you old witch. You are going to face me." A year ago, that sound would have sent me scrambling to a corner, my heart seizing with a terror so profound it would have paralyzed me. But I was not the woman I had been a year ago. I stood in my small, quiet living room and listened to the storm break against my house. He expected me to scream, to cry, to cower. He thought he was writing the final violent chapter of my story. He had no idea I was calmly writing the epilogue to his. I did not go to the door. Instead, I walked to the front window, which was partially obscured by a large fern. I looked out. He was a wild man. His face contorted, his expensive suit rumpled. He was the picture of a man who had lost everything and had nothing left to lose. And that, I knew, made him dangerous. But I was no longer his victim. I was a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher with a lifetime of experience in handling bullies. What is the ultimate answer to a bully's rage? It is not a louder shout. It is not a more powerful fist. It is the quiet, calm, and devastating voice of procedure. It is the simple, powerful act of refusing to play their chaotic game. I pulled out my new regular cell phone. My hands were perfectly steady. I dialed 3 numbers, 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. 911, what is your emergency? Hello, I said, my voice even and clear, never taking my eyes off the man unraveling on my lawn. My name is Hattie Mae Johnson. There is a man at my home violating a restraining order. Yes, the order was issued by Judge Albright 2 weeks ago. His name is Derrick Collins. He is currently on my front porch, attempting to break down my door. He appears volatile, and I am alone in the house. Please send an officer. I gave her the address. As I was speaking, Derrick saw me. He saw me through the window, standing in my living room, the phone pressed calmly to my ear. He saw the serene expression on my face. And in that instant, the incandescent rage in his eyes flickered and was replaced by something else. The dawning, pathetic horror of a man who has just realized he has made a final, fatal, and incredibly stupid mistake. His fist, raised to pound on the door again, froze in midair. The shouts died in his throat. He had come here for a primal personal confrontation. He had forgotten that, in this new world, all of his actions had official, documented consequences. He began to back away from the door, his face a mess of confusion and dawning panic. He stumbled off the porch and started to run, a graceless, desperate scramble back towards his car. But it was too late. From the end of the street, I could hear the faint, approaching wail of a siren. The police arrived in less than 3 minutes. They found him fumbling with his car keys, a panicked animal trying to escape a trap he had just willingly walked into. They apprehended him without a struggle. The fight was gone. All the arrogance, all the power, all the fury had evaporated, leaving behind only a scared, defeated man. I watched from my window as they put him in the back of the police car. The red and blue lights, which had been a symbol of my daughter's ruined life on my own front lawn months ago, were now a symbol of my final quiet victory. He had been defeated financially. He had been defeated legally in civil court. And now he had been defeated personally, arrested not for his complex white-collar crimes, but for the simple, brutish act of a common thug, unable to control his own rage. The car pulled away, taking the last vestige of the storm with it. The street was quiet again. The climax was over. I had not raised my voice. I had not met his violence with violence. I had simply stood my ground in my own home and used the power of the law and the truth to protect myself. The war was finally, truly over. The silence that followed the siren's fade was different from any I had known before. It wasn't the tense, watchful silence of my imprisonment in their home, nor the anxious, hopeful silence of the diner as I waited for the trap to spring. This was a quiet, solid silence. The kind of profound peace that settles over a landscape after a great storm has passed, washing the air clean. It was the sound of a foundation that had been tested by an earthquake and had refused to fall. It was the sound of being truly, finally safe. The police took my statement at the kitchen table. I was calm, factual, and brief. I showed them the restraining order. I told them he had been pounding on my door. They were kind, respectful, and efficient. Before they left, the senior officer looked at me with a knowing, weary sadness in his eyes. "You did the right thing, ma'am," he said. "You'd be surprised how many people don't." After they were gone, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my small, comfortable living room. The adrenaline of the confrontation began to drain away, leaving a deep, quiet stillness in its wake. My lawyer, Mr. Franklin, called about an hour later. "Hattie, I heard what happened," he said. Are you all right?" "I am, Franklin. I am perfectly all right," I told him, and I was surprised by how true those words felt. "Well," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice, "your son-in-law has just made a catastrophic final mistake. Violating a restraining order is a serious offense. Given that he is the subject of an ongoing federal fraud investigation, a judge will see this as proof that he is volatile and a danger to the community. He will not be getting bail. He has effectively locked his own cell door and thrown away the key. He is no longer your problem to worry about." He was no longer my problem. But as I sat there, a new, more complex sorrow began to surface. My mind turned to my daughter. What does a mother owe a child who has betrayed her so completely? Does love have a limit? Derrick was now in a prison of steel and bars, a place of his own making. But Monique, she was in a different kind of prison, one built of her own greed and terrible choices, and I did not know if I possessed a key for that one. She was now the wife of a disgraced, incarcerated felon, her name tied to his public shame, her assets frozen, her future a ruin. I felt a profound, aching pity for her, the kind a teacher feels for a brilliant student who has willfully, tragically thrown their own life away. My lawyer told me that, in time, the courts would unravel the financial mess and my money would be returned to the trust. "We've won, Hattie," he said with finality. "It's over." But as I sat in the quiet of my new, safe home over the next few days, I realized the victory felt incomplete. Justice for one woman, for myself, was not enough. My entire life, I had been a teacher. And the teacher in me knew that a lesson, once learned, must be shared. I thought about all the other elderly men and women, the other Hatties who did not have a shrewd lawyer for a friend, who did not have the foresight to build a legal fortress before the attack came. I thought of the countless quiet tragedies playing out behind the closed doors of loving, smiling families. The idea when it came was not a flash of lightning, but a slow, steady dawn. It felt like the most natural, most logical conclusion in the world. I would use my experience as a blueprint. I would use my pain as a shield for others. I would use my second chance at life to give others a first chance at justice. The following week, I called Mr. Franklin. There was no hesitation in my voice, only a clear and resonant purpose. "Franklin," I said, "I need to see you. It's time to set up a new trust." "Hattie?" he asked, confused. "Your assets are already in the Eleanor Trust. They're perfectly safe." "Not that kind of trust," I said, a smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. I want to set up a charitable foundation, Franklin. I have a name for it, and I know exactly what it's going to do. I met with Mr. Franklin the following Monday. We sat at the same oak desk where we had once plotted my defense, but this time the dynamic was different. I was not a client seeking protection, I was a founder outlining a mission. It will be called the Eleanor Fund, I said, the name feeling solid and right on my tongue. It's for my mother, Eleanor Grace Johnson. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. She taught me to always look for the root of a problem. And the root of this problem isn't just a single greedy man, it's the vulnerability of an entire generation. I had spent my life teaching children the alphabet and multiplication tables. My new classroom would be different. My students would be my own peers, and the subject would be survival. How to read the fine print in a contract and how to read the fine print in a loved one's heart. I laid out my vision. The Eleanor Fund would be a non-profit dedicated to fighting familial financial abuse against the elderly. Our mission would be twofold. First, we would provide free or low-cost legal aid to seniors who found themselves in a crisis, connecting them with honest, powerful lawyers like Franklin. Second, and more importantly, we would be proactive. We would run workshops at community centers and churches, teaching seniors how to protect their assets before a crisis, explaining the power of tools like irrevocable trusts and durable power of attorney. We would give them the blueprint to build their own legal fortress. Franklin listened, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. "Hattie," he said when I was done, "this is a magnificent idea, and I know just the people to help us build it." And so we began. We assembled a small, formidable board. Franklin took the lead on the legal structure. He brought in a sharp, fearless young litigator, a woman who reminded me of Jessica Riley from Another Story of Resilience, to head our legal aid division. We found a retired forensic accountant who volunteered to run our financial literacy workshops. My new family began to grow, a family built not on blood but on a shared purpose. How do you fight a crime that thrives in the shadows of family and trust? You don't fight it with anger. You fight it with knowledge. You give the vulnerable a blueprint, a lawyer, and a simple, powerful word they have been taught to forget: no. The legal battles to untangle my own finances took the better part of a year. Derrick and Monique were forced to sell the house to pay back their debts and the liens Franklin had placed upon it. What was left of my money, once the fraudulent mortgage was cleared, was returned to the safety of my trust. I used a significant portion of it as the seed money to launch the Eleanor Fund. Sometimes to build something new and strong, you have to use the stones from a ruined building. My broken relationship with my daughter became the cornerstone of a foundation that would protect hundreds of other mothers from suffering the same fate. It was a painful but powerful kind of alchemy. The story now jumps forward a year. The Eleanor Fund operates out of a small, welcoming office in a converted historic house not far from my own little bungalow. The walls are painted a cheerful, sunny yellow. It is a place of hope. I am there most days. I am not a lawyer or an accountant. I am the heart of the operation. I am the one who sits with our new clients, the frightened, heartbroken seniors who walk through our door, and I listen. Today, I was meeting with a woman named Mrs. Gable, a sweet 80-year-old widow whose grandson had been helping her with her finances. Her story was painfully familiar. I listened to her, held her hand, and told her she was not alone and she was not foolish. I then walked her down the hall and introduced her to our lawyer. I watched as the fear in the woman's eyes was replaced by the first fragile flicker of hope. I left the office late that afternoon, my heart full. It was not the easy, simple happiness of my early life. It was a different kind of joy, a tough, resilient joy, forged in fire and repurposed into a tool for good. I had transformed my personal tragedy into a public service, and the women and men we helped, the community we were building, they had become my real family. A year ago, my little bungalow and its small, neglected yard were just a safe house, an anonymous refuge from a storm. Now, they are my home, my sanctuary. The garden, once a patch of weeds and packed dirt, is now a riot of color and life, a testament to what a year of patient, loving work can create. Every flower that blooms here feels like a small personal victory. I think about my daughter, Monique, sometimes. It happens on quiet Sunday afternoons like this one when I see a young mother pushing her child on the swings in the park across the street. The anger is long gone. The burning sense of betrayal has cooled, leaving behind only a deep, profound, and bottomless sadness. Can you mourn someone who is still alive? I believe you can. I mourn the little girl who loved sunflowers with a fierce and joyful passion. I mourn the bright young woman she could have become. I have made my peace with the fact that the person I mourn is truly gone, replaced by a stranger who wears her face, a woman now forever shackled to the consequences of her husband's crimes and her own terrible choices. I think of her as a sad, painful lesson in the corrosive power of greed, and then I let her go. My phone buzzes on the small table beside my rocking chair. It is not from her. It is a text message from Mrs. Gable, the frightened woman who came to our office last week. Just wanted to say thank you again, Hattie, it reads. Because of you and your lawyer, my grandson can't touch my accounts anymore. For the first time in years, I slept through the whole night. A slow, genuine smile spreads across my face. This is my family now. The women and men who come through the doors of the Eleanor Fund, the small, brave community we are building together. We are a family forged not of blood, but of shared experience and a common, unyielding belief in justice and dignity. My victory was never about revenge. It was about purpose. They tried to take my life savings from me, and in doing so, they inadvertently gave me the greatest gift of my life, a new mission. My final years will not be spent in quiet, lonely retirement. They will be spent building, teaching, and protecting. They will be spent ensuring that no other parent has to watch the love for their child be turned into a weapon against them. I stand up and walk into my small, sun-drenched garden. I walk to the back fence, where the sunflowers stand tall and proud, their heavy heads turned toward the afternoon sun. They were the first thing I planted here. For months, the word sunflower had been a secret, a code for a desperate battle. Now, they are just what they were always meant to be, a symbol of resilience, of a deep and abiding love for the light. My victory is not measured by Derrick's prison sentence or Monique's ruin. It is measured in the grateful text messages from women like Mrs. Gable. It is measured in the legal shields we build for the vulnerable and the quiet strength I see in the eyes of those we help. My victory is not that they fell, but that I, Hattie Mae Johnson, a 72-year-old retired schoolteacher from Atlanta, am still standing. And I am helping others to stand too.